All right, welcome in. A very happy Tuesday to you now here to College Basketball Tip-Off Show powered by WagerTalk.com. Are you ready for more madness? I only ask because it's on its way here. In just a couple of days, the Sweet 16 will take center stage. And, of course, at WagerTalk.com, we've got you covered on every angle, every game breakdown that you need to know. We have got you covered. And we've got, don't forget, some NIT action here. A couple of the extra tournaments going on that people seem to have forgotten about. Doesn't mean that there's not great angles or opportunities there and value to cash a few tickets. And we've got two guys on the show today that know a little something about finding value in winners here. Double R1L, Steve Merril in the house. Technology be damned. Merril is here ready to roll, as is Mr. Rob Veno in the house, ready to go. And by the way, big shout out to those of you joining us in the chat room. We go live here to give you guys an opportunity. Any questions you might have about these upcoming games, if you're new to us, drop them in the chat. That's what this is all about. We'll go ahead and get to as many as we can. So big shout out to Instagram, YouTube Shorts for those of you on a mobile, as well as our YouTube page. And gentlemen, let me start with an overview. We did this yesterday. I asked Drew and Brian Power some of their thoughts on the weekend that was, right? I mean, a little chalky for some people's taste there in the round of 32, Merril. But all in all, I tend to think it's a better tournament without the random 14 seed that's going to get absolutely smoked in this round anyway. So all in all, not a ton of surprises. How about you?
You're exactly right, Joe. And there's no question the NCAA committee, the selection committee, feels the same way you do. You know, year in and year out, we talk about how we wish more of these mid-majors make it. I think the first team that probably, a lot of people thought should have made it is making a nice run, by the way, the NIT. They happen to play tonight, is Indiana State. And by the way, I do have a free play on that game between Cincinnati and Indiana State on my page right now at WagerTalk.com, Steve Merril for Tuesday night. But like you said, they want the blue bloods. They want the big boys in this round. And everyone loves the Cinderella story, but nobody wanted to watch that Oakland-NC State game. Although it went to overtime, it was a great game. It's a game nobody cares about, right? So they didn't want James Madison in it anymore. They want Duke advancing. And, I talk a lot about the Ken Palms. And look, I use proprietary models and simulations myself. But the Ken Palms are fun to talk about because, first of all, they're free. They're widely available. Everyone can look at them. And they go back over 20 years. And granted, as teams improve in the tournament and they keep playing, they do move up in the rankings. But right now, as we head into the Sweet 16, 13 of the top 14 Ken Palm teams are still playing. There's only 3 teams outside the top 14. That's how top-heavy it's been. It's only the 5th time since 1979 that all 8 top seeds have made the round of 16. That's the 1 and 2 seeds making up half the field. And it's ironic, isn't it? Because last year, I believe, was the first time ever that no number 1 seed made the Elite 8. And we have all top 8 seeds now in the round of 16. So pretty certain we'll have some 1 seeds for sure in the round of 8 this weekend. But it's for good basketball. We've got some great matchups this weekend and some of the best games we'll have all year.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Rob Veno, what did you think there? Obviously, the upsets in the round of 64, which I think is to be expected. But really, when we got to the weekend in a round of 32, it was like, yeah, Duke is not impressed with you. Purdue is not impressed with you. Go down the list here. And what we thought was a lot of parity turns out to be, well, I guess there's levels to this thing after all, isn't there, Veno?
Yeah, and that's the way it used to be, Joe. I mean, looking back, I don't know, 15, 20 years, second round used to be just a weeding out process. Yeah, thanks for participating in round 1. Say goodbye in round 2. The underdogs would attract a lot of money and then get destroyed. So I think, when you go over these games, these 8 games that make up the Sweet 16, you are forced with some very difficult decisions because there's good arguments for both sides in almost every single one of these games. I think a couple of things to note from what happened over the course of the weekend. And Marquette, as we know, totally different with Tyler Kolek. They almost blew that game, but boy, they were out extremely quick on Colorado. Colorado had to make a extreme comeback to make it close in the end, but Marquette is totally different with Kolek. NC State is now 7-0 against the spread in tournament play, ACC tournament and NCAA tournament combined. look pretty good right now. Kelvin Sampson's team, survival of the fittest in that game against A&M, and kudos to Buzz Williams and what he did at the end of the season to turn A&M into like a high-scoring machine. A couple other teams that have been really impressive here, Joe, that maybe some might have thought could be gone by this point in time. Iowa State and Clemson. I think Iowa State, what they did against Washington State, that burst they put on has people now saying, you know what, maybe Iowa State's for real. And of course, Clemson, 2 really big wins. I'll talk about that game in a minute when we do big game breakdown. But I mean, New Mexico and Baylor are good offensive teams that Clemson basically shut down. So a lot of things that we saw over the weekend makes for 8 really good games. And now the change of venues, it's kind of like start all over again, right? Because now we're all in 8 different arenas, and we'll see what happens from there.
Yeah, it's a couple of days off, a little bit of travel, right? Some still have an advantage over others, so there's still a lot to be determined, but 4 number ones are still alive, and that's our question for you here today. I know we have this poll up for those that are watching us via YouTube Shorts on their mobile phone. And for those of you in the chat rooms, just tell us which number 1 seed loses first. Is it Yukon? Is it North Carolina? Is it Purdue? Is it Houston? Which one, in your opinion, gets bounced before it's all said and done? And Merril, we'll come back to you, R1L. Let's talk here a little bit about some of these games coming up. We do have some other tournaments, right? It's not just the Sweet 16. I know I saw Georgia, Ohio State. There were some questions about some of these games coming up here. Which one did you look at here that you like a little more than the rest?
Yeah, we're going to actually look at one of the CBI games down in Daytona Beach, Florida for Tuesday night. It's the semifinals. Now, just a quick reminder, I do have a free NIT play tonight also, and that's Cincinnati-Indiana State game. So a free NIT play Tuesday night, Cincinnati-Indiana State on my page right now, Steve Merril, WagerTalk.com. And while you're there, in that free play, there's a link for a free contest, Sweet 16 contest, where if you pick all the games correct, you win a free year of my service. But you can also win a 1 day or 1 week, anywhere 11 out of 16 or more, you win free service. Check out that free college basketball content and the free play for tonight for Tuesday, Steve Merril, WagerTalk.com. Let's look at a play in the CBI tonight, a big game breakdown for you. This tournament takes place neutral court in Daytona Beach, Florida. They play back-to-back scenarios, so it's a little unusual, a little different than the NIT, the NCAA. And this is a spot now. Fairfield, Seattle play the late game tonight at 9 o'clock Eastern. Fairfield playing their 3rd game in 3 nights here with no rest. They had to play Sunday and Monday. Meanwhile, Seattle, a little bit of a benefit. They played Saturday, had Sunday off, so they're in a back-to-back spot after beating in Evansville, and they beat them by 12 last night, whereas Fairfield had to go down to the wire with a 3-point win against Chicago State, and now it's their 3rd game with no rest in 3 nights. So I think the scheduling edge goes to Seattle. Seattle's also the better team, but the biggest edge for me, they're the much better defensive team. And we look at this a lot in conference tournament action, right? This is similar to a couple of weeks ago where teams are playing 2, 3, 4 nights in a row. And it's always, first of all, hard to shoot well 3 or 4 nights in a row, and especially when you're not used to playing with tired legs. And the game is such a 3-point heavy game nowadays, it really is a disadvantage for teams that rely heavily on the 3, and Fairfield does that. They shoot 37% on the season. They take 25 threes a game. Meanwhile, Seattle's a little bit better about scoring within the interior, and they're the much better defensive team. 41% allowed. Fairfield gives up over 46% on road games this year. So we're getting a much better defensive team, the better team overall, no rest situation. I like University of Seattle. This line opened 6, and we have seen some sharp money come in. And it's pushed it up to 6.5, but it's now 7 at some of the sharper books around the world. I like Seattle at minus 6.5 to 7. I would play it sooner than later as the line is rising. And once again, that's around 9:30 Eastern, I believe, tonight on Tuesday in the CBI semifinals.
Oh, I like it. All right, Seattle for the win, to win by margin. Again, 4 games on here tonight. Arkansas State, High Point, Cincinnati against everyone's darling that most people are pretty pissed off didn't make it there. Veno, that being Indiana State. How many Indiana State fans do you think are going, we would have done better than Drake did. At least we can make free throws. And then we do have some questions coming up with Georgia and Ohio State. And before we get your big game breakdown, Veno, so far, not a lot of people very excited about, it looks like, Purdue's chances in our whole question of making it past. A lot of folks thinking here that Purdue is the first number one seed that will lose out here in the Sweet 16. So interesting stuff there. But Veno, what do you got for us here today for a big game breakdown? Which one of these upcoming games are you looking at?
Yeah, Joe, like a kid in a classroom when you were talking about that poll, I raised my hand immediately. So I agree with the audience. Of course, we wait for Matt Painter to do Matt Painter things. It's been way too good for Purdue the first two rounds. We'll see what happens from here on out. But I'm going to look at Clemson and Arizona. Talked about a little bit earlier how Clemson has been really impressive so far. Game opened Arizona 6.5, 152 the total. Arizona's pushed up to 7. I think I saw like a couple stray 7.5s out there, Joe, but still 152 the total. Perhaps the line move correlates to the venue here, which is Crypto.com Arena in Los Angeles. Certainly location favors the Arizona Wildcats, whose fan base travels very, very well. I would expect Clemson to travel too. I didn't check their ticket sales as of yet, but I'm sure Clemson will put some people in the stands, and Arizona, though, likely to have a little bit more in their corner in that game. I think when we first look, let's just look at experience in this game, right? It's all Arizona in that aspect. They've got 3 starters who have been in a Sweet 16 game already. Pelle Larsson, who's been there a while, Omar Ballo. They played 6 games each in NCAA tournament action. Now, both were in the Sweet 16 matchup back in 2022, where our favorite producer, Robert Harris's Houston Cougars, wound up beating them. Last year, they lose in the first round to Princeton. Point guard Boswell, he was in last year's game as well. So they've got experience being here. Count Caleb Love, right, in his UNC action, went all the way to the championship game a couple of years back. So they've got guys that have been involved here, plenty of them. For Clemson, the only guy that's been in NCAA tournament action would be Joe Girard, who did it with Syracuse back in 2021. The transfer now to Clemson played into the Sweet 16 with Syracuse. But the rest of the team has no NCAA tournament experience other than what they've had so far this year. I mentioned the LA venue certainly helps Arizona a little bit. There could be a personnel advantage here for Clemson, though, Joe, because they've got guys that have seen Caleb Love plenty before, and especially the 2 that are going to be asked to defend him. Chase Hunter, Joe Girard. Chase Hunter obviously been on that Clemson roster for a while now, played the last 2 years before Love transferred to Arizona. He played against UNC, defended against Caleb Love. When you go back and look at those games, you find that Caleb Love didn't perform well in Clemson, but the following year at UNC, he did perform well. Joe Girard, of course, faced him a couple of times with Syracuse. So that could be big here when it comes to defending Arizona, because you start looking at field goal attempts by their individual players, and it seems like Caleb Love get ball, shoot ball, and the rest of everybody watch Caleb Love shoot the ball. So that could be really big for Clemson in this game. And I think that Chase Hunter, the one guy that you saw after the conclusion of the other game, who was kind of like frantically yelling into the microphone, "I've got blood all over me. Let's go. Let's play again." This team has taken a defensive mindset and a very physical mindset, which Arizona doesn't like to play oftentimes. So could be interesting from there. The tourney strength of schedule so far is all Clemson, right? They beat New Mexico. They beat Baylor. Baylor happens to be the number 5 3-point shooting team in the nation, and they held Baylor to 6 of 24. They held New Mexico to 3 of 23, just 13%. The perimeter defense has been great. And Caleb Love, the guy who hoisted up for Arizona, has not been great through 2 games shooting the 3 so far. The team has been pretty good overall, 21 of 53, Arizona 39.6% from beyond the arc. So that 3-point matchup will be interesting. Clemson kind of mixes man and zone we'll see. But you have to give, like I say, the strength of schedule to Clemson here, because Arizona, they push Long Beach or lose depending upon where you got the number, 20 or 20.5. They barely cover Dayton, lay 9.5, win by 10. And those two teams are both easier, in my estimation, to play than New Mexico and Baylor. And what's good about those two games for Clemson is that New Mexico loves transition offense, speed it up the way Arizona does. Clemson's already showed you that they can defend that. So, again, there's a lot of things here that point to Clemson plus 7.5 as being a decent look as far as on the floor is concerned. Again, venue and experience go Arizona's way. But if you're just looking at matchups and what's been done in this tournament, looks to me like Clemson. You can add to that, Joe. Clemson's 8-1 against the spread as an underdog this year, and you're going to get 7.5. So I think for a big game breakdown, it's still a couple days away, but my initial look is toward Clemson plus the points here.
Yeah, I would say, we got a great question on Instagram that came in, and a couple of comments, Merril, about your lack of a free play. They're looking for it. So may want to hop on that, Merril, because we're getting all sorts of she stacked dollar, not happy, looking for that free play of yours you mentioned, can't find it. So we'll get that up there in just a minute.
Hold on, let me check.
I'm just saying.
It was there an hour ago.
I'm just saying they're having all sorts of issues finding
what
it
happened
for you
here. Hold on.
Clint, by the way, has got Creighton
I'm looking at it right now as we do this show. Live at 2:27 p.m. Yeah, 2:27 p.m.
Sure?
Eastern. And look, I am having some tech problems today. I'll be the first to admit it. You guys know this, but I am on my homepage right now. Steve Merril, WagerTalk.com. Get there quicker with shortcut WT.bar/SM. And it says free picks, and you click on it. It says, I'm not going to give it away, but it's Cincinnati at Indiana State, and I do have a side in that game. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. It's on my homepage right now. You got to go below hey, Joe, you got to go below the 2 strong NBA best bets for tonight that are for sale.
She stacked dollar on Instagram. You got to kind of scroll down a little bit, is what Merril is saying. But judging from his microphone issues today and everything else, it was worth the question.
Unless my eyesight's gone bad, it's there.
I'm just saying.
Unless my eyesight's gone bad, I think I'm seeing it.
Yeah. So we do have a question. Shout out to Clint, by the way, who's got all sorts of he's got Creighton beating Purdue in the Elite Eight here. Some great comments, by the way, in the chat, and some great questions, guys. We're going to get to them here. But one that just came in from Damn Daniel. And I think it's a great question as far as who would you say the most overrated team is left here in the tournament. And Veno, I think you just kind of touched on this game, and I'll say it too. It's Arizona. The fact that they're not even the favorite to take down as a number 2 seed, they're the favorite. North Carolina's not even a favorite to win the West over there, and yet they've done nothing that would lead me to believe that, they won't still win that. But I do think the love for Arizona, and on paper they look great. But Merril, I mean, how many more times will we have to watch Arizona not live up to expectations here? Michigan State was the same thing. Like Michigan State, you are what you are. I don't trust Arizona in a big spot here coming up. And to Rob's point, why are we sleeping on Clemson and acting like we're in the Sweet 16? There is no more luck. You're here for a reason, right?
Right. Well, I mean, the reason they're favored to win the region is because they have an easier game to get to the Elite Eight. I think that's the logic there. They're a 7.5-point favorite, whereas North Carolina has to get by Alabama. Otherwise, I think Carolina will be favored most likely in that game. Although I don't know. I mean, Arizona still might be favored over them when they go head-to-head, if they go head-to-head. Clemson's an interesting case study, Joe. Year after year, the teams that nobody thought deserved to get in and then are single-digit seeds, like Michigan State, a 9, Clemson, a 6. They always seem to do well, but that often dies off in the second week. So we'll see if Clemson can keep it going. But the other ACC team we haven't talked about, I just said Carolina Clemson, is my answer for most overrated team. And I know it's the low-hanging fruit. They're the worst team remaining, but NC State. 5 wins in 5 days just to make the tournament. And yes, they won both games last week, but they got fortunate. They didn't have to play Kentucky. They played a 14 seed in Oakland. They played a mediocre Texas Tech team the round before that. They were a phony squad. With that said, the only team to ever win 5 games in 5 days and make the tournament was Yukon back in 2011. They won the national championship, but that ain't happening here. NC State is done. And even if they get by Marquette, which I don't think they do, they got to play the Duke-Houston winner, which are two of the best teams in the country. So NC State's Wolfpack triple in pretty shortly here.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Rob, Veno, most overrated at this point. Who do you think it is? Because I'll have an update on the poll question about who's going to be the first number one to lose in the Sweet 16, which it's getting interesting there. But who do you think is the most overrated at this point?
Yeah, I mean, if we're going off of results, first 2 weeks, Joe, and overrated or overvalued, meaning according to point spread and their margin, the difference between what the point spread was and what the final result was, then it is Arizona, right? I mean, they play 2 weak links and they can't cover one game. Best you could do is get a push, and then they can't cover, or they barely cover against Dayton. So all in all, they're like a half a point better than the competition so far, Long Beach State and Dayton. I mean, at least in NC State's case, they're an underdog this week. They're still getting 6.5 to Marquette. So I don't know if they're overvalued because they are an underdog and they did cover their first couple of games. But this team is out there again as a sizable favorite, as you mentioned, having shown us nothing as far as point spread covering ability through 2 games is concerned. So I think if it's kind of different the way you phrase it, right? Overrated, overvalued. They're kind of different words in gambling terms. Overvalued meaning somebody who's just, the point spread doesn't dictate what they've done so far. And I think in that case, the value point, overvalue, got to be Arizona, because the rest of these teams, as much as I think Purdue is going to fall, Joe, they pretty much dominated the point spread so far. So I can't call them overvalued. The point that odds maker hasn't come close to Yukon, hasn't come close on a lot of these teams. NC
True.
State, how about, Alabama's in there, and who knows how good Alabama really is. If you want to just talk about overrated, maybe Alabama's going a step too far too.
Yeah, so it's a good question, because we got a few guys in the chat, and I want to say a big shout out to those of you joining us here today live on this Tuesday, now the 26th. It's all about the Sweet 16 college hoops, although we got a couple of games coming up here tonight in those other tournaments here. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button, like button. We would certainly appreciate it. And shout out to those joining us on Instagram, as well as those on a mobile watching us on YouTube Shorts here. Merril, what do you think? I mean, if you had to, because the poll question's getting a lot more level here. Purdue is the early favorite on the number 1 seed, most likely to lose first here. Purdue covering around 40% now, but Houston is right behind them. And my question is, how confident are you that Houston, who was, I mean, let's face it, that was just an all-out war. That poor kid who hadn't played more than 7 minutes in his entire college career has got to go out there and shoot free throws to win the damn game, and he does. But, sometimes that works against teams where maybe they don't have a whole lot left in the tank going up against Duke. How do you view that win? Congrats. But are you worried that maybe that took its toll on Houston as well?
It's so funny. I was telling that story to some people, parents and players, at an AAU basketball practice last night. Because a lot of people hadn't seen it. I go, they're so thin after fouling out in overtime that this guy has not played for 2 hours. He's 3 for 4 on the season from the free throw line. And I'm sitting there watching. It's a 3-point game. I was like, the safest bet ever is he's going to miss this. But he missed it long. And credit to the announcer. He pointed that out. That's a good indicator, because normally when guys choke, they miss it short. They hit the front of the rim. And he switched the next one to give him a 4-point lead. It was a nice little shot, but that is a tough scenario, to say the least. And it got me thinking more about Houston, the way they let A&M back in that game. They were up 10 late. They allowed A&M to get to a 3, and that gave them the ability to hit that lucky 3 at the buzzer, but they were in a situation to do it. Houston, year in and year out, seems to be one of those teams, kind of like Gonzaga for many years, that could get really close but just isn't going to get it done. They don't pass the smell test, and they're a really good offensive team. They're still like a top 20 efficient offense, but they're never top 10. They're always number 1 defense. And if you look at all the teams that have won it, in fact, the last 7 or 8 tournaments, the team that has won it has always finished with a higher offensive rating than defense. Even when Virginia won it 5 years ago, they finished 3-5 in the Ken Palms. Houston is not going to finish with a higher rating. They're currently 14-2. They're not going to overpass that strong defense. That's the same reason I'm not big on Iowa State. 49-1 are their current ratings. Now, Bama's the extreme opposite. Bama has by far the worst defense. They're at 101. No defense that bad has ever come close to winning the title in the last 20 years. So you can eliminate them as well. As far as the poll question, the first number one seed that plays is Yukon. So technically they could be the first to lose, but they're not going to. And then you've got
Good
UNC
point.
as the shortest favorite of the four. They played the next game on Thursday. So theoretically, you probably take a shot with UNC, but I think UNC's defense is much better than Alabama's. So we go to Friday. Matt Painter, Purdue, always looking to fade him. Don't disagree there. But Houston, Duke, I get back to that Houston team. Duke is really good, vastly underseeded as a 4 seed. In fact, right now they're the 6th overall team, the Ken Palms. That would be like a high 2 seed. So, yeah, I could see a couple number ones going down on Thursday and Friday.
All right, so there you go. I mean, Rob, what would you be shocked, Rob, if we got to the Final Four and it's all number ones? Or you think the chances of that are slim to none here?
I don't know if you could be shocked by anything, Joe, honest to God. I mean, if Houston makes it through Duke, they get the winner of Marquette, NC State. I mean, they'll be a favorite again. If North Carolina gets through, they'll be a favorite again. Connecticut will be a favorite again, so on and so forth. So to be shocked, I don't think I would be. I would say this about Houston. It's a team that never goes deep. Personnel wise, right? Kelvin Sampson is a 6 or 7 man rotation this year, like a 7-man rotation guy. It took 4 starters to foul out of that game for Houston, for that game to be dragged where it was. I mean, they coughed up a lead late, but every single one of those starters is a key component. And when LJ Cryer left the game, it hurt, no doubt about it. And again, credit to Buzz Williams and his guys, Wade Taylor and company. For Houston, they get the 4 days off now. I think you refresh, and are you going to ask Duke to foul 4 of their starters out again? Because I don't know. We'll see if McCain and Roach, the guards for Duke, are up to the pressure that they're going to see. Now, they've got good ball handling numbers this year, but Houston turns people over like crazy. And we saw Houston go out there mad at Kansas and just absolutely chop down their center, Hunter Dickinson, in that game, and they beat that team by 25. So I wouldn't put it past Houston to get by Duke. I don't know that Duke faces anything this physical here as they will here. But again, I don't know if I'd be surprised if all 4 didn't make it. I certainly think UConn's going to get there, so we'll see.
What do you think? We got some great comments in here about maybe the possibility of Love in Arizona having to take on North Carolina for all the marbles there coming up, and maybe the experience factor. But I think Love he's a wild card, because that guy could either not get it going and be a total detriment to that team, or he could end up taking them to the national championship. But there's a lot of love, Steve, for the Zags. I'm seeing it in the chat rooms too, which makes me worry, because we're still looking for the wheels to fall off of Purdue. But now nobody paid attention to the Zags throughout leading into the tournament. But now it feels like the Zags are going to be that trendy dog that we're going to be looking at here in 16. Not saying they can't beat Purdue, but it feels like they are becoming that trendy dog this round.
Totally agree, Joe. That's what I've been saying about teams like Michigan State and Clemson. Now, everyone thought Gonzaga should get into the tournament, but like you said, no one's talking about them. And I mentioned earlier how Houston and Gonzaga always seem to underachieve. Well, this year, no one's expecting anything from Gonzaga, so you almost feel like they're going to overachieve for that reason. I will point this out, though. I mentioned the metrics. I've gone back to the history of the Ken Palms back to 2002. That gives us 21 tournaments. The past 21 tournaments, almost always a higher offensive rating, but they're almost always a top 10 offensive efficiency team when it's all said and done, but they're always a top 25 defense as well. That eliminates 5 of the 16 teams defensively. I talked about Bama, NC State, Illinois really bad defensively. Clemson actually is only at 38th. Gonzaga is only at 41st defensively. So I do think they will falter at some point. And then of the other 11 remaining teams, the only ones that really have a chance to be a top 10 offense when all is said and done is maybe Houston, maybe. North Carolina, maybe. They're actually at 16th. Connecticut is there. Arizona is there. Purdue is there. I mean, Purdue keeps sneaking in. If it wasn't the Matt Painter factor, I'd be very bullish on Purdue. But I do think the Painter underachieving is a real thing. But Duke is also in that mix, along with Creighton and maybe Marquette. So there's only really 6 teams or so I think that can still win this. But Matt Painter is kind of a disqualification for Purdue. And it was funny. I was listening. Shaka Smart takes that first 4 team in 2011 all the way to the Final Four at VCU and becomes famous because of that. I don't believe he's made it out the first weekend since until this past week when they finally won.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking on the radio about, I was listening to this on the radio actually, and they go, he's such a brilliant X's and O's guy, just like Matt Painter. And I was laughing to myself because I'm like, the guy, they're saying Shaka's a lot better than the results, and then the guy to compare him to is Matt Painter. I was like, you're not doing yourselves any favors with that argument. But we'll see what happens. And Rick Barnes, of course, at Tennessee is another guy that has underachieved for decades. So you can get your short list down pretty quick when you start eliminating teams like that.
So, Veno, here's, I've done a bunch of shows here this week, all over the place on different networks, and we go through all of these Sweet 16 games. And here we go again. We've gone 30 minutes. I've seen it in the chat room now. Nobody is talking about Illinois. Like, nobody even brings them up like they're even in the tournament. So I think too much offense I don't trust Iowa State offensively. I think they're going to need buckets. They ain't getting them. But I think there's a lot of ways Illinois can beat you here. But maybe we should look at them as maybe one of the more underrated because to me, they're the most dangerous team on that side. I don't want to play Illinois. Illinois, if I got to get in a shootout, which I most likely have, they got more weapons than I do, Veno, and that's always going to be a scary and older weapons too. That's one of the more experienced squads in the Sweet 16.
Yeah, it's funny, Joe. The shootout teams are all on that side of the bracket, right? Illinois,
Yes.
North Carolina, Alabama, Arizona, all these teams that want to get to 91st are all on the same side. And Illinois, I think, what happens and why Illinois gets lost in the wash here is that they were not at any point this season the best team in the Big Ten, or at least nationally stated as the best team in the Big Ten, but they did come on like crazy late. Brad Underwood, not necessarily a head coach that believes in this type of style, which is outscore your opponent, but they've got the pieces for it. And Terrence Shannon has been maybe the best player in the country for about a month. I think I read this morning he's averaging 32 points per game over his last 10 or something crazy, simply unstoppable at this point in time. They've got a bunch of three-point shooters. So, yeah, could they outscore Iowa State? Absolutely. You're talking about a venue switch where there are times, and we saw it against Washington State, it took Iowa State a little while to get going and score some points. They relied on their defense until then, and then they passed Washington State. But that being said, Illinois' offense is 10 times what Washington State's is. So if you get behind them, it's a pretty big comeback at that point in time. So I could see Illinois. I want to just backtrack real quick here, guys, to Gonzaga. And
yes,
we joke about it a lot. Rick Barnes, Matt Painter. But I don't think you can leave Mark Few out of the equation, right? How many years did Mark Few have the horses and come up shy as well? I mean, like Steve said, maybe this year under the radar a little bit. Maybe they'll overachieve, but he's another one of these coaches that goes so far and then eventually his team gets booted. Where Houston is concerned, I always think that Houston in the tournament is a team that eventually they'll have a night where they don't make their threes, and that's generally what gets them ousted. Is they have a night where they're like 3 for 23 from 3-point range, and the defense isn't good enough. We'll see. Creighton is one we haven't really talked about, but they have an offense, as far as starting lineup is concerned, as good as anybody with inside outside, because you have Kalkbrenner as a big force inside and then the exterior guys. And to me, they look exactly the same on the floor as Purdue does. It's will the surrounding parts, Baylor, Shireman and company, do the job? And for Purdue, it's always those 3-point shooters, right? Mason Gillis, Fletcher Lawyer, these Braden Smith. Are they going to do the job for Purdue? We'll see, but I don't know that Purdue's any better than Creighton at this point in time, to tell you the truth. So they could be a team as well that we might look out for. And don't let me leave out, because we can poke holes in every single one of these, right?
Yes.
Don't let me leave out Tommy Lloyd, who has only been there a short time.
Oh.
He's a Mark Few assistant, but Tommy Lloyd plays that team out of the tournament. And so far they've come up with 2 games where they barely got a cover and didn't cover. So there's a lot we could talk about here for sure.
Well, we do have a couple of guys in the chat. Want to send a shout out again. Anthony joining us via Instagram. Justin's got a crazy money line parlay here today, in which we'll get to in a minute with some of the games going on. Merril, your free play is one of those plays in there with that you just gave out here on the show. Seattle, I believe, is where you were leaning in that game.
Yep.
Ohio State and Georgia. There are some question marks about that game tonight. We'll get your thoughts on that, but don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the like button if you could, guys. We would much appreciate that. Of course, that thumbs up always goes a long way. Merril, there's a lot of San Diego State love going on right now in the chat rooms.
Wow.
Didn't we see this?
That.
Didn't we see this?
Yeah.
Because I could have sworn we saw Yukon. How did that work? Now, to me, the San Diego State team last year was better, and they still weren't good enough. And I think the Yukon team is better this year than they were a year ago.
Correct.
So I'm having a hard time figuring out where San Diego State is going to pull off the upset of the century here.
Yeah, wasn't the line like half of what it is this year? And the line's currently 11. It was like 5 or 6 last year, if I recall. So, no, you're exactly right. And I'm glad you circled back to UConn, because I was thinking as Rob was talking, the one team we haven't talked, he said Illinois, but the one team we haven't talked about is UConn, the best team in the tournament. My prediction to win this whole thing when it started, they were 4-1. Now they're 2-1. And they get a very favorable matchup here. They don't have to play Auburn. And I'd said when the tournament began, let's back up a little bit. First of all, UConn last year won the whole thing. They finished number 1 in the KenPoms. They were the 4th-ranked team when the tournament began last year in the KenPom. I archive all of this. I go back and research it. They were a 4 seed, yet they were 4th in the KenPoms when the tournament started. Guess what the situation was this year? Auburn, the only top 14 team right now in the KenPoms not to advance, they were the 4th team when the tournament began as a 4 seed. So they were vastly underseeded. They caught a bad matchup in the first round with the slow-down Yale team. Otherwise, I really thought this game, Auburn-UConn, was going to be whoever gets to the finals. Now it's a much easier pass for UConn. And they get a pretty favorable setup after this as well, as they get either Iowa State or Illinois. And one of the reasons I'm talking about all these metrics, why you got to have a top 10 offense. In fact, I went back and looked. 18 of the last 21 national champs finished top 9 in the KenPom offensive rankings at the end of the season. So basically, you have to be a top 10 offense. And the reason is you have to win 6 straight games. And when you're inconsistent on offense, like an Iowa State that's only in the top 50, you have an off night. And that's what Rob was saying about Houston not hitting their threes. And that's the same problem Houston has. They're probably not going to be a top 10 offense when it's all done. They're only 14th right now. Now, that doesn't mean you can't win any one-and-done scenario. Illinois, by the way, the number 1 offense in the country. Iowa State, the number 1 defense in the country. Efficiency out of 362 teams. So it's a really interesting matchup. Illinois' defense will prevent them from winning 6 straight, but so will Iowa State's offense. UConn's got a really nice path here to the Final Four, and they're definitely the team to beat.
Yeah, no, they are, and there's only a handful of ways to be able to keep betting them. I still think altogether they're plus money, Merril. I mean, to win it all, or are they all?
They're 2-1. I'll just check. They were 4-1 when it started. I'm seeing them at like 2-1. So it's been cut in half, but they've got a cakewalk basically to the Elite Eight now. So that's part of the reason.
Yes. Yeah, Klingon versus Leday, as Leg Show magazine saying in the chat room, should be maybe worth the price of admission. I thought the same thing with Kalkbrenner and Dante there, Veno, and Dante exposed his ass. They just ran out of steam there for Oregon against Creighton. But you're right. I think those 2 big men should be worth just watching the game as far as that goes. Interesting comment here from Clint on Instagram saying, first half overs, 27 and 18 against the numbers so far in the NCAA tournament so far. So we have got offenses lighting it up early and often, which is usually the MO, Robbie, of Houston, right? But he wants to know, do you think we're going to see a big adjustment over the weekend, or do you think that this is just a case where some of these offenses are just overperforming out of their mind? I mean, how many points has Houston played in the last 2 games? Even in regulation, forget about the overtime. Houston was never a team that we can count on to score 89, 95 points here. Do you think we're going to continue to see teams coming out and just lighting up the scoreboard like that?
Well, there's a handful, Joe, that won't play any other way. right? Alabama won't
Right.
play any other way. Credit to Bryce Drew and Grand Canyon for, just not taking the ball out of the net after an Alabama hoop and running back down the floor. Most teams fall into that, right? Because it's so easy to get two against them, but they didn't fall for it. Here's the problem with 27 and 18 overs in the first 4 days is that now there's a venue switch. So you got to get used to rims all over again. And as these games dwindle down, they become more important. And sometimes the squeeze, it's really hard, Joe, to figure out of these 16 teams, who's going to come out and make shots right off the bat and what really good offensive team is going to come out and be ice cold right off the bat. You don't know. So first halves, to me, at least Thursday, Friday, become a little bit more unpredictable until you settle in. The good news for Thursday, Friday games is you do have additional prep time for your opponent as opposed to Thursday, Saturday, Friday, Sunday, where you'll only have one day. But they're all played in NBA arenas now, which is not stadium venues. So the sight lines and whatnot shouldn't be a problem. But again, it's really difficult to tell. And I would say this to you, to your point about Houston and how many points can we expect out of Houston? Money came in on the over that day, but I think it was all pro A&M, the way A&M had been scoring, and Buzz Williams just refused to play half-court offense against that defense. And that's a smart theory, right? You don't want to come down and set up or let Iowa State set up. You don't want to let San Diego State set up. You don't want to let Houston set up. There's a few teams like that. You really don't want to let Connecticut set up. So, or Tennessee, you try and run, and matchups mean everything. Shot making, of course, is the big difference maker, and we'll see who can come out. I think they're all individual. Obviously, to make a blanket statement, will we see that type of number again? I don't know if I could make
it. Yeah, it's a good question, Merril. It's a good point here because all the venues change now. Everyone for better, like going to the Carrier Dome, which usually the Carrier Dome for years, Merril, it was an automatic bet, first half under. No matter what, because these teams would come in, they couldn't hit water if they fell out of a boat because they're in a football arena and now not a basketball arena that they're used to. So it's an interesting point. I mean, that is 27 and 18 against the number to the over in the first half is a great, that's a great start, but that's probably all going to change here. I don't know if the books are going to adjust that much to make it worth hopping on that trend.
Well, I mean, the other thing to keep in mind, unlike the NBA, college basketball, they always inflate the second half totals. You're talking about anywhere from like 8 to 10 points higher the second half total will be than the first half. So it takes a little less to get the first half over. And the reason being, especially in the tournament, is that when a team is down, it's do or die. They don't live to play another day. They're going to foul more down the stretch in close games, and you get all those extra points in the second half. You don't see that as much, especially in the NBA regular season. In fact, you often in the NBA see first half lines that are a little bit higher because of the blowout factor. So it's something to keep in mind. But yeah, I would err on the side of probably unders more in the first half, especially on Thursday and Friday for the reason Rob mentioned is that the guys have been off now. They might be a little out of rhythm with the travel and new arenas, even though they are NBA arenas. I don't put too much into the fact that last week went over. I think that was just random variance. One angle I will point out real quick, you can kind of put these in your notes, all the viewers out there for next year. I haven't gone back and researched it, but I think it makes a lot of sense. Teams that played on Tuesday and Wednesday, those two 16 seeds that advanced, I thought it was interesting that both Grambling and Wagner covered the first halves against Carolina and Purdue, yet they got blown out in the second half and still failed to cover the huge numbers overall. And obviously Carolina and Purdue were great second half plays on top of that. Something to keep an eye on because the two 16s that had just played had some momentum, a little bit of flow, and then as expected, they got just blown out in the second half. They didn't have much left in the tank. Be an angle interesting to keep following because it worked pretty well this year.
Yeah, no, it's a great call there. It's going to be interesting. I'd be careful with the trends at this particular point, just given that everything changes here now, especially in these some of these early games. We do have a couple of more questions, by the way, guys. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you're joining us here for the first time. Shout out to those joining us via their mobile phones on our YouTube Shorts feed. Certainly appreciate you guys. Rusty wants to know if we think Tennessee can make it to the Final Four. And Veno, to me, Tennessee, I think this is This is the game that'll determine what happens here with Rick Barnes. Can he get past this game and move on? If he does, I like his chances because I do think certainly there's no shortage of talent with Tennessee, but I do think this is probably the litmus test to think if Tennessee really has a chance here.
It is for sure, Joe. And again, as Steve mentioned early, what we all agree upon is that the Matt Painter factor is a real thing. The Rick Barnes not covering numbers is a real thing.
Yeah.
At 4-17 now and 21 NCAA tournament appearances, 4-17 covering the spread after they failed to cover against Texas. However, the good news to take from that Tennessee game is they went 3 for 25 from 3-point range. They shot 12% from beyond the arc and still beat Texas. The defense was that good against a really good offensive team. I think Texas had the number one effective field goal percentage in Big 12 play this year, and the Big 12 has a lot of good defenses. So if you're going to take something good from that game for Tennessee, you take that and you say to yourself, well, they can't shoot 3 for 25 from 3 again. So they're probably right in it here with with Creighton. You start going through player matchups and that's a difficult game, but I agree with you. You got to get past this one. The line is only 3, which tells you how much respect Creighton has in the number here. I guess Coach McDermott is the one guy we haven't really picked on yet as a guy who could falter for Creighton. Generally, we don't see them come this far, but they do have a really good inside out, and they can play slow and methodical, and they can play up and down. It'll be defensively with them. Real quick with Yukon, guys, for those who don't know, that Boston venue is a huge, huge asset for Yukon. I mean, if you're not out of your house right now and driving to Boston, you're probably going to get stuck in traffic for 2 days because they travel, and it's about 90 minutes away. And San Diego State is light years away from where Boston is. So big advantage home crowd for Yukon in that game.
Yeah, it truly is. Stop Marcus there on his mobile hanging out in YouTube Shorts. He thinks Yukon is going to roll. I don't blame him. He had a UNC ticket before the tourney. So do I. And Bama is not going to play enough defense, I think, to make a difference one way or the other. Merril, we do have a fantastic question coming in. And I want to make sure I get the quote correct here because it may be the question, Rob Veno, of the century here. And let me see if I can just find this here correctly because I believe Merril question wanting to know now that college basketball is coming to a close, what are you going to watch with William and Mary? I think that's an absolutely outstanding question. And it's legit here. Now that college basketball has moved on, Merril, what exactly are the plans for William and Mary content you will be consuming?
So it's funny you say I actually went to the baseball game 2 Sundays ago. I hadn't gone to a game about a year. I went to a Woodbury baseball game, and I just earlier today had a 2016 CAA Baseball Champs shirt on, but I switched before this, put the Woodbury sweatshirt back on, so I could actually have shown you a Woodbury baseball shirt, but instead I got a basketball T-shirt on. But all seriousness, they hired a new coach. They hired the Cornell head coach for the past 7 years who played at the NIT. He's coming to Williamsburg. The press conference is tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern. I was thinking about trying to jet out of here right after Wager Talk today and catch it, but I don't think I will. But interesting hire. And my first question was, why would he leave an NIT team to come here? But he's doing it, and we're going to find out how it goes.
Big shout out to Raymond Long joining us. First time in the chat room there, joining us here on our Facebook page. We certainly appreciate our YouTube page, rather. We certainly appreciate you coming in here, Raymond. Also, some are mating. I mean, what was that? Fortnot there. Women's water polo. Are you up to date on William and Mary women's water polo? And if they have a women's water polo team, that's basically everything we need to know about that. All right, last game here, guys. We'll run into it here quick. And I don't know if either of you have a strong take on the game coming up tonight between Georgia, who lost 10 of its, final 12 regular season games. Then they get here, and it's like, oh, okay, now Mike White's got him playing. And it's like, you got to be kidding me, taking on an Ohio State team that, Go figure. You get rid of Chris Altman, and now all of a sudden everything changes there. They go more up-tempo. It looks like a pretty high total, too, I think. 150, 151, somewhere in that ballpark. I know Justin was looking to pair that up, I believe, with Seattle and maybe one other game there on a money line parlay. Either one of you, Merril, I'll go to you. Georgia, Ohio State here tonight. You leaning one way or the other?
This is a situation in which Ohio State's going to need to slow the game down. They're at home. Normally, home teams can dictate the tempo. Georgia does like to play faster. You look at the metrics, I think they're 55th and 56th in the defensive efficiency. They're almost dead even. But Ohio State has a substantial edge offensively. But then again, winning by 9 points or more, are two different animals. I will say this. Ohio State shoots 77% from the free throw line this year, 78% at home. So those are the type of metrics you look for. The better defense, good free throw shooting. I'd probably lean towards Ohio State if I had to play it.
Yeah, how about you, Veno, with this game here? Kind of tough to get into in front of this Buckeye. I mean, they scored, 83 and 88, I believe, here, which I guess you'd have to think that Georgia's going to be able to commit enough to even think about the over in this one. What are you thinking?
Yeah, tough for me to talk specifically about Joe because it's my NIT play that's up for sales.
Well, then forget about it. Don't worry. But no. We move on then because I got another question in here coming in from Raymond here. And by the way, if you want his specifics, go visit his page over at WagerTalk.com. He's got that up and available, ready to roll. This is a really good question from Raymond. Says, with it being in a game in LA on the West Coast, and with UNC and Alabama both traveling cross country, and the time, maybe this would be a good time to look on the under with them, given the fact that everybody's probably running to the over, Veno. But that is a little bit of travel and an interesting spot on the West Coast between two teams that, well, let's face it, didn't spend a lot of time traveling to the West Coast here this year.
Well, they haven't run to the over yet, mostly because, if sharp money doesn't come in initially, public money's not going to come until tip-off. So if you do like over, you probably play now. I'll say this, unlike what we just talked about with Bryce Drew in Grand Canyon, North Carolina could care less. I honestly feel like North Carolina figures they can outscore Alabama. But that being said, you could see Saturday, if it was Saturday or Sunday, whenever UNC played, how ticked off Hubert Davis was with his defense during a sideline interview, right? And all of a sudden, they're trailing 26-14,
Yep.
and UNC decided to lock down. And it's just not the same opponent is my hesitation, right? Because Tom Izzo's team, they walked the ball up. And I'll give you some specifics here. They walked the ball up. I had 26-14, 10 consecutive trips to try and play into the teeth of that North Carolina defense, and it did not work. They blew that 12-point lead. UNC went into half rolling and won that game. Alabama will not walk the ball up under any instance. If UNC makes a shot, ball's coming in and they're flying back down the court. So I do think you're going to get plenty of opportunity to score in this game. The question again is going to be, like we said earlier, do shots fall consistently for these teams? Even in a game like this, guys, I don't know that shots have to fall consistently because there's going to be so many scoring opportunities. And when you play at pace like that, the foul line obviously becomes a factor because there's a lot of fouls when teams are playing fast like that. So I'd be hesitant to go ahead and play under because of travel considerations or anything. I'd be a little less hesitant if you were to say maybe the first half is going to come out and neither team is going to be hot. But again, to ask both of these teams to go cold as good as they are at scoring, I don't know if that's the case either. I'd be a little bit leery of playing under in that game. I think Alabama is going to be very, very happy to be able to put their track shoes back on after, surviving that game against Grand Canyon.
I agree. One more shout out to B28 Lawson on his mobile phone there, watching us via YouTube Shorts. He compared, Merril. It says UNC played Miami Miami and Alabama are they're the same team. Great offensively, can't play any defense. And he's got a point, right? I mean, I think it's a pretty good comparison, UNC to what Miami was, and UNC handled it, or Alabama and what Miami is.
Yeah, Miami and Florida right now is 113th in the KenPom defensive rankings. Alabama's, I think, 101. Alabama plays a lot faster, actually, than Miami of Florida. But what jumps out to me, guys, is I always like to look at road games this time of year because these are all neutral sites. It tells you quality teams. I think over the last 20 or 30 years, every national champ has had a winning road record, by the way, which is a very interesting metric. Alabama just 8-9 away from home, and I believe that includes the 2 wins last week. They might have been just 6-9 before that. UNC 15-6 on the road. UNC allows 41% shooting. Alabama allows almost 48% shooting from the field, and I think that'll be the difference. UNC also giving up just 30% from 3 on the road this year, which is really impressive. So there is no doubt who the better defensive team is, and I do think Alabama probably the better offensive team, but UNC is up there. And UNC likes to play fast as well. We saw them speed up a slower Duke team in both wins this season. So this is a tough matchup for Alabama for numerous reasons, in my opinion. And I agree with what Rob said, man. As a coach myself, I loved that interview. It's probably the best interview I've seen all season. Hubert Davis is still the best shooter I've ever seen in person. He went to my rival high school. He went to Lake Braddock. I was at Robinson as a 10th grader coming out of the weight room one day, and there was some dude in the gym, nobody else in there, and he must have switched 100 straight three-pointers, and that was Hubert Davis before he went on to North Carolina. This is late 80s, early 90s, whenever it was, and I still think of that every time I see him. So he's always been a guy I've rooted for, and I think he's doing a great job at Carolina.
And listen, the mark of a great coach is his team. He knows how to push the right buttons at the right time. And you know what? In that Michigan State game, he called that timeout and he pushed the right buttons at the right time. And that's a mark of a pretty damn good coach here. So I am with you guys on that. All right, listen, we do have the NBA show, a little afternoon update coming up here, top of the hour. As a matter of fact, I believe the 2 gentlemen here with me will be back in an hour, guys, going live, getting you updated on everything that is going on in the NBA. 4 games on the slate, but 4 fantastic games on the slate here. Very playoff-esque style basketball games coming up. We will go Q&A. We'll answer any questions you guys might have about those games. Andy Lang will have a same-game parlay for us, too. He'll talk some props. We're not done just yet today, but a big shout-out to all of you guys in the chat room. We appreciate great content, great questions here all day long. Go ahead, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so. Become part of this Wager Talk TV family. Again, shout out to those of you new who just stopped by here. We certainly appreciate it. Shout out to Clint and the others over on Instagram. You guys rock. We appreciate it. Listen, no matter what, best of luck with all the plays here tonight. Come back and join us again soon. We'll do it, in fact, in about an hour. Come back and join us here on Wager Talk TV. We'll see you then. Good luck.